You're listening to the 2018 Nelson Arts Festival Page and Blackmore Readers and Writers Program. This session features Michele A'Court in conversation with Ro Cambridge. Kia ora, everyone. Good afternoon. We've just got a few people coming in, I think, at the back. Welcome to How We Met with Michele A'Court and Ro Cambridge. My name is Kerry Sunderland. I'm the coordinator of Readers and Writers. A very big thank you to Page and Blackmore, our sponsors for this whole program and today's session. There will be a chance for you to buy a copy of How We Met after the session and come and have a chat to Michele and get her to sign it. I believe we're going to have some time for questions too. Is that right, Ro? Yes, we'll have some time for questions towards the end of the session as well. But without further ado, please join me in welcoming Ro Cambridge and Michele A'Court.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to have this chance to have a conversation with Michele. We haven't met before, but we have been exchanging emails. The first reason I'm really thrilled is because this book, How We Met, made me feel a lot better about the human race. At this kind of stage in the world's history, it's so nice to be reminded that people can be decent and kind and treat each other well. And even if we're not perfect all the time, we really make an effort. And the second thing is I'm also very, very interested in storytelling. I'm a writer and I write a fortnightly column for the Nelson Mail that's really just storytelling. And with a friend, Joe Firestone, I'm co-creator and co-producer of a show called Couch Stories, which is all about getting pretty regular type people up on stage telling a true story from their lives. Our 14th show is over on the main stage on Tuesday. I think there are a few tickets left. I've got a bit of a plan. But we may well wander off the road. First of all, I'll let you know a little bit about Michele's background, although you probably know an awful lot about it already. And then we'll go a little bit further in, a little bit deeper, and find out what makes you tick.
All right.
I can hear the ticking from here.
All right. Buckle in, everybody.
About the process of writing the book. And then about this whole subject of storytelling, which goes into interesting detail in the book. So first off, Michele trained as a journalist and has a degree in English literature and drama. She has what she calls a portfolio career, and it involves stand-up comedy, writing for magazines and newspapers. She writes a weekly column on social issues for the Sunday Star Times Weekend magazine and for Stuff. And interestingly enough, it appears in parallel with a column written by your husband, doesn't it? Yeah. He's also a comedian and a musician and a writer, and they reflect different approaches to the same subject often. It's really interesting. She's been on our screen since 1987, when she was a presenter for a TV show that I remember, it's called What Now? And she's appeared in TV dramas, including Shorten Street. And she was an original member of the team of comedians who brought the hit TV show 7 Days to our screen. She's got plenty of stage experience under her belt, including roles in Mike and Virginia, the Virginia Monologues and Mum's the Word. And she created a one-woman show, which not surprisingly, but coincidentally I reviewed very favourably, Michele.
It was nice, yeah. It was.
And is quoted on her website. Anyway, a one-woman show based on her first book, which was Stuff I Forgot to Tell My Daughter. Michele was named New Zealand Female Comedian of the Decade, not the year, the decade in 2010. And in 2015, she won the Vac Riley Comedy Award for Excellence. She also works as an after-dinner speaker, event host, conference MC, and voice artist. How she fits in writing books, I don't know. So we're here to talk about Michele's second book, How We Met, and its subtitle is The Way Great Love Begins, and it's full of great How We Met stories, 42 of them, and they're charming and funny and often very moving as well. But it's about a lot more than that. It's also about what draws couples together, people together to make a couple, and it includes some nice practical wisdom discovered on the way about how to make that love last if you find it. And she gets a bit of input from a neuroscientist and a psychologist about the power of storytelling. So it's very much about the power of storytelling. We'll get into that a little bit later. This festival wouldn't exist if we weren't all fascinated by stories, whether they're true or made up. Yeah. But this book focuses on origin myths, if you like, of the couples, and all tribes and nations and religions have these origin myths. They seem really important. Okay, Michele, the thread that seems to bind your whole career together, and it's a pretty big kind of career, is loving to be entertaining and amusing and to make people laugh. I thought it would be...
Did somebody just laugh at that? Was that? That's great. That's lovely. Good timing. Okay.
I thought it'd be good to begin with, how did you meet your career, so to speak?
I come from a long line of storytellers on both sides of my family. So my grandmother was a fantastic storyteller and very funny, and my great uncle Frank would tell the same stories every time we went to visit and tell them in pretty much the same ways, but still managed to make them exciting and thrilling for us. Family stories were a big part of my growing up. My mother was an actor, and in the 1950s, a professional actor, and then after she married my dad and had my brother and I did amateur theatre for forever. In fact, I just did my very first, so the first stage I ever stood on was the Levin Little Theatre. I was 5 years old. In a play, I played the smallest footman, and my line was, "Why has His Majesty got his foot wrapped up in a duster?" And I remember that because I was there a week ago for the first time standing on that same stage as a stand-up comedian. Since I was 5 years old, so that's like 20 years ago.
Just yesterday.
So that was a really lovely full circle thing. So I came from a whole family of storytellers, really. Yeah. So that's how we passed ideas on to each other, was through, often quite well rehearsed stories. Semantic memory, as I've learnt to call it.
Yes, we're going to touch on semantic and other types of memory. So another theme that, if we're going back to family, is, and you mentioned this in the book, that your family has had social activism as a kind of a part of its
My
history.
great-grandparents, John and Edith Rogers, came to New Zealand. John came in 1912, I believe, Salvation Army officer, and so was my great-grandmother Edith. He came first of all on a sort of recce to New Zealand to see if this was a good place to bring the family, and she left England at the end of 1913 and arrived at the beginning of 1914 with my grandmother, my great aunt, and my great uncle. So Salvation Army officers, and my mother and I talk about it a lot, that they were very poor. Not long after they arrived, my great grandfather had an accident, a workplace accident, and he was crippled for the rest of his life, and so took up embroidery and tatting and passed that down the male line of the family. And so my great grandmother did everything she could to keep the family together, bringing in washing, cleaning churches, doing those kinds of things, but still always staunch Salvation Army officers who they called them prayer meetings at their house, but really it was an opportunity for anybody in the neighbourhood who didn't have enough food to come and share a meal with them. And we've talked about that a lot with my mother and my grandmother, who's gone now, but that it was as much about sharing what they had and fighting for social justice as it was about their religion. So yeah, I mean, my grandmother, as a teenage girl, would go and sell the war cry in pubs, and I have often tried to suggest to my family that what I do of going into pubs and telling jokes about the things I care about is just like selling the war cry. No one's buying that.
What about the tambourines and with the ribbons? And the uniform?
Yeah. So my grandmother got, this is not in the book, but my grandmother was a feisty number, and she divorced her husband in 1950, which was unheard of. They were both Sallies, and she had my mother, who at that point would have been 15, and she also had my aunt, who would have been maybe a year old. But despite being a Salvation Army officer and a musician, my grandfather was he had affairs all over the show, everywhere they went. And by the 1950s, she went, no, she'd had enough of that. So she divorced him, which was outrageous. And as much as the Sallys disapproved of infidelity and adultery, they also strongly disapproved of divorce. So she had to leave the church, leave the army, and he got to stay. But so that's the sad part of the story. But the part of the story that I adore is that for the rest of her life, wherever my grandmother went, the Salvation Army would turn up. So, for example, when many years later we lived in Levin, don't make me talk about it, it makes me sad. And my grandmother lived in one part of Levin and we lived in another street, but the army knew where she lived, but they also knew that on Christmas Day she would be with us at our house in Kauai Road. And so every Christmas Day, the Salvation Army would park their truck outside our house in Levin and play carols. And we'd all go out and, sing along. And I thought they went to everybody's house. But they didn't. They came specifically to our house because that's where they knew my grandmother was on Christmas Day. And I have other stories that I won't go into. But then a few years later, in my grandmother's last years of her life, she lived in Wanganui, where my parents had moved to, and lived in a retirement village. And the Salvation Army truck would park up outside the old people's, the retirement village, and play carols on the back of the truck. And we don't know how the Sallys knew where my grandmother was, but they did, and they came every Christmas. So, yeah, I love that story. Yeah.
Let's vote for the Sallys.
Did she? Yeah, loved it. Once a Sally, always a Sally. She also, I will stop talking about this in a second because it's got nothing to do with this. But when I was a little girl, she would take me to Wellington and we'd stay at the People's Palace, which was owned by the Sallys in Cuba Street. And you hold on to those memories as a child because you know they're important, but you don't know why. And so she would take me to stay at the People's Palace, and Sally officers would come to see her. I always felt like I was travelling with a rock star or a movie star. Everybody knew my grandmother. She was famous, and they all came to see her and spend time with her and treated me like a little princess. So they kicked her out of the army, but they kept that connection going, and she kept that connection going just quietly too. Never wore a bonnet again, obviously, but yeah, the connection never went. Yeah.
It's interesting how officially she was disconnected or excommunicated, but that unofficially she was really still woven in with stories.
Yeah.
Just going briefly back to the matter of your career, did you just build it intentional brick by intentional brick? Or did it just, a whole lot of things just happened and now, hello, there you are?
It feels organic. I just do things because I either am passionately driven to do them or somebody offers the opportunity. But I can tell you that when I was a little girl, the two things I didn't know which one I wanted to do, but I wanted to be a performer and I wanted to be a writer, and I didn't know which one I should choose. And I'm now doing both of those things. Yeah. When I was in the 70s, I used to watch the Carol Burnett show. My people. And it was a sketch comedy show, and but the bit that I liked the most about that show was when Carol came out and talked to the audience. So one stall, one microphone, one woman talking to the audience, and I thought, I don't know what that is, but I would like to do that. And so that's pretty much what I do now.
Any other of those early comedians that had some sort of influence?
We watched the Wheel Tappers and Shunters Social Club. So this is the 60s and 70s, really. Dave Allen, Lucille Ball, Carol was my favourite.
Phyllis Diller?
Yeah. Cloris Leachman. And Joan Rivers was one of my early favourites, and stayed that way. Yeah.
Okay, so now we move on to the book.
Oh, good, thank God.
My point of the exercise team. When and how did the idea of the book come to you?
Oh, it's all good ideas arrive. I was drinking, and so stuff.
Good for a Salvation Army child.
I know. I fought against the salliness of some of the salliness, not all of it. So Stuff I Forgot had just come out, and I was exhausted from touring the show and talking about the book. So Jeremy and I went on holiday, as we do, to Rarotonga, and there's this English couple there that we met many years ago, and we meet them by accident, and now we meet them on purpose, and they're really lovely people. They live in Rarotonga, and we were out for dinner for the 7th or 8th time over the 7 or 8 years that we've known them. And I said, how did you two meet? And they told an amazing story about being in Derby and being a bit pissed. And they were vague friends. And she fell down a hole in a kebab shop. And
As you do.
as you do. And they've been together ever since. So he carried her out of the cellar and took her home. And they've been together, at the time they told that story, I think they'd been together then 19 years. So, and it was this gorgeous story and very funny, but I noticed as they were telling it, so there's 4 of us at the table, and I noticed as they were telling the story that they stopped talking to us and they started talking to each other. And it's like we weren't there, and their eyes lit up, and as they talked about falling in love, it hit me that it looked like they were falling in love. It was really sparky and passionate and lots of frisson. And I said to them at the end of the story, that's a great story. I love those stories. I wish somebody would write a whole book full of those stories. And they went, go on then. And
As fate would have it.
yeah, so I started working on it then.
Okay. I since I've been reading the book and thinking about this interview, I have been just pouncing on people and say, how did you meet someone? And people don't have to think for a second. It's the story they absolutely are ready to tell.
Yeah.
And the couples, they together. And you can. I know exactly what you mean about that. They look at each other and then they're off.
Yeah.
Did you have any doubt though at the beginning whether there'd be enough sort of meat in that sandwich to make a whole book out of it?
Not really. I didn't. I knew that there would be different kinds of stories. There'd be, instant stories, and there'd be slow burns, and very quickly, once I put the word out that I wanted to write a collection, gather up a collection of those stories, there were types of stories that I kept seeing repeated. People who hated each other at first sight, or loved each other at first sight, or almost met many times and got driven apart, so there were sort of patterns to it that I started to see quite quickly.
Right, so plenty of meat actually. But did you have, was it difficult to convince your publisher that there might be a book's worth?
No. I think I may have even sent an email from Rarotonga going, I've got an idea. And he went, yeah, come back, sign the contract. So it has been tricky because the person who commissioned it then left the publishing house, and so and he was enthusiastic, and I think the concept of the book is a little confusing to some people. For example, if you're looking for this, it's not in non-fiction, it's in self-help. I wrote a self-help relationship book.
Wow.
Which for somebody who's been married 3 times is quite remarkable. So yeah, but apparently once a book is about relationships, it's self-help rather than non-fiction or storytelling or any of those things.
Actually, I was going to ask this question a bit later on, but in the book you say how you and Jeremy are, enjoy each, rock solid, you adore him.
Oh, didn't mean to laugh.
That was when you wrote the book.
Yep. No, still adore him. He's
how
wonderful.
you enjoy and how much you enjoy each other.
Yep.
So I wondered whether you might have been less tempted to write a book like this if you were in an unsuccessful relationship. The fact that you're in one that works.
Yeah,
Now.
maybe. But so like we, for example, I don't feel like there's a lot of me in the book in the sense that we don't have a great how we met story. We have other stories that
Do you want to share
matter
about
to
your
us.
how you met?
The other story.
At yours, your one.
How we just
The
met at work.
unspectacular story of how you met.
Yeah, okay, so we met at work.
They don't work in places that most of us work.
No, well, we were both stand-up comedians, so we met at the Classic Comedy Club. Yeah, so we're not one of the people in the book, but we do have a story that I have put in the book that I think is one of the stories that binds us together.
Yes, I love that story.
Yeah.
You might want to, if we've got time at the end, you might like to
Yeah.
tell that. So we've got how you came up with the idea. How did you actually find your subjects?
I did a shout out on social media, on Facebook and Twitter, and so I got some responses from people that way, but probably the most effective way was through Radio New Zealand National. I did an interview with Jessie Mulligan in the afternoon slot, and I mentioned it on the panel a couple of times, and I also did a shout out on Radio Live or somewhere, I don't know. Anyway, and then very quickly stories started flooding into my email, but also people would dob friends in. And occasionally during the process, I would just be somewhere, and because I go places, I go out go for work and stuff, and people would say, "What are you doing?" I'd say, "I'm working on a book about how people fall in love," and they go, "Oh, here's my story," and I'd get my phone out and record them. So that was but many of the stories came through email, which was great. I did observe to myself that my email inbox was the exact opposite of Nicky Hager's inbox when he was writing Dirty Politics. My inbox was full of all these beautiful stories about people being kind and generous and lovely and human, as opposed to evil bastards, which is nice. Yeah.
Now, the stereotype I've got is that women would be much more eager to tell stories than men.
That's what I
true?
thought too. And I thought that because women talk about their relationships with each other, and I hadn't had lots of conversations with men about their relationships, but it turned out roughly 50% of the emails that I received from people were from men who wanted to tell their stories. There's people going, "Oh," it's a terrible assumption on my part, really. And I ran that past Jeremy and said that men want to tell their stories, and he said, "Yeah, of course they do. They're really proud of having found someone that they want to spend their life with, and of making that work as well." So yeah, lots of the stories came from men. Lots of the emails began, "I met my beautiful wife 25 years ago, and I met my fabulous," so yeah, it was gorgeous, really nice, yeah.
The other thing I thought about a lot of them are really trusting you with some very personal stories. And sometimes they're sort of secret histories of what's happened in relationships, or the family histories. How did you go about establishing some rapport and trust with they? And also the other thing is that it's going to be made public in a book.
Yeah.
It's more than just confiding to you. It's
That's
going
right.
to end in a book.
So one of the things that some people have their story in this book, and I have given them fake names, because people wanted to share their narrative but protect their identity. Easy now. There are several stories in the book where people have said to me that they just wanted to be able to say to their daughter, for example, I'm thinking about Tom and Elizabeth, that's not their real names, obviously. They wanted to be able to go, "This is our story, this is where we came from," because it was a story that they had been ashamed of and hadn't shared, but they wanted it in a book so they could point to it and say, "This is our story and we're not ashamed of it now." And other people just wanted to protect their privacy. In terms of developing trust, I promised people that I would show them the story before it went to print.
Okay.
Partly so I could fact check, but also because it's their story and it belongs to them, and I wanted them to feel safe about it. And people kind of trusted me because, like for example, I managed to get an appointment with a world-renowned neuroscientist because she used to watch me on What Now.
Wow.
And she thought, yeah, that'll be fun. So so people kind of knew that they could trust me. Yeah.
And I guess it's something to do with the sort of person that you appear to be. That there was a sort of shortfall between how you appear in a public sense and how you were in turning up with them, something like that.
Yeah.
And 42 couples, the stories of 42 couples appear in the book. How many interviews or how many stories do you think came your way And then we'll go into the matter of how many interviews.
Probably, maybe there were another 42. And I just picked the stories that made me excited. Yeah. So I apologise if anybody in this room sent me a story and never heard back from me.
It was unexciting, sorry.
Yeah. But I mean, there were so many stories that I could, I mean, I could happily write volume 2, but yeah, I just went with instinct going, that's a great story. I'm fascinated. I want to hear more about that. Please, thank you.
And coming back to the gender differences between the genders, did the way the men told their stories differ from the way women told the same story?
A little bit. Men are really visual. And I'm not talking about porn. Like the detail of what a woman was wearing is so clear. You know, I'm talking about people who have been in relationships for 30 or 40 years, and he remembers what colour her jandals were, and what the described earrings and the way she wore her hair. And I mean, women do that a little too, but they often talk about their emotional response or a physiological response to it, but men can paint a really clear picture of exactly what kind of tartan, high-waisted, paper bag-waisted pants she was wearing. So, I mean, I say this in the book, any time that a man says to you, it doesn't matter what you wear, I don't care, bullshit. They are paying attention to the nth degree and encoding that memory and retrieving it years, decades later.
It seems to me that some parts of the stories are just verbatim in the book, and I know that you must have. Did you have a PA or somebody to do the transcription?
I used a transcription service, an
sure.
American one, which was fantastic for New Zealand vowels and Māori words. Te Atu North came back as Teatro del Norte.
Woo!
Which should probably catch on. And there was somebody. Oh, there's a story in there about her husband cooked her a degustation meal, menu thing for an anniversary, and it came back that he cooked her a digger station, like a truck.
Delicious.
Yeah. So that was really fun. But yes, it would have taken me for the rest of my life to transcribe all of that. Yeah.
But the book wouldn't have been nearly as interesting if it had simply been a collection of transcripts. Because what I loved about it was that I felt like it was like, as the reader, being invited into the conversation, and that you recorded things like the body language, the laughs, winks and nudge, and people blushing, so you get all the subtext and all that other stuff that's going on between the couple that wouldn't show in a transcript. And how did you manage that?
I made the decision early on that I wanted to try and tell each of their stories using their voice. And I don't know how successful I've been at that, but I can tell that my narrative style changes in each chapter a little based on the kind of people that they are, if that makes sense to you. I mean, some of them, like there's a whole chapter of elevator pitches, which is pretty much verbatim what people sent me, just little tiny stories. The stories that they're practiced at telling at dinner parties, because we all say, how did you meet? And they've got a little prepared story. So there are some of those little prepared stories in there. But for the bulk of them, I either went back to them via email or Skype or phone and said, give me some more detail, and asked them a bunch of questions. And I also really noticed that I would ask them, please show this to your partner, to your husband or your wife, to your partner, and they would come back with more detail, that the bits that they'd left out. And then the people that I got in my car and drove to, it's even bigger stories and more detail, and lots of moments of people saying, I don't know if I've ever told you this before, to their partner of 35 years, or and then go, which is really fun, and people disagreeing about stuff. No, it didn't happen like that, and you always say that happened. It never happened. I did not have an affair.
And we're going to touch on that, because this is about how memory works and what you do and don't remember when you're in particular ways of encoding memories. Did we did sort of touch on this, that as the stories came to you, you could see that there were various themes. But did you also have some idea of how you would structure the book overall? Like, with the idea of consulting experts, or that you may have something about, okay, this is how they met, but it might be good to have some stuff in about, so now they've met, how do they stick together for so long?
Yeah. So I arranged the chapters in terms of themes, like, there's a chapter full of people who hated each other when they first laid eyes on each other. Some couples get a whole chapter to themselves because their story is so complex. And then along the way, I started getting really curious about the brain science. And so at the point where I started getting really curious, that's where that chapter goes. And then I apply the information that I got from the neuroscientists to the rest of the stories, and again with the relationship expert on, and then in the middle of it all, I just did a whole bunch of what I call research, which is Googling the science, the brain science of the chemistry, all the chemicals that go off in your brain when you hot for someone. Yeah,
extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, you can't actually. You think you're making rational decisions, but actually, it's nuts or no, not.
Yeah, no. All that passion and chemistry and primal stuff beats rational decision making every time.
Yeah. And yet, what really struck me is that this is a very a special subset of people in relationship or who have had relationships. Like, these are the ones that work. These are not the people who said how we met and hated each other's guts.
Yeah.
It's the ones who stick. So there must be some magic about making the right selection. It seems to me that relationships that fail are often to do with just pure selection errors. But if the chemistry is so powerful, how the heck does anyone ever make sensible decisions at that stage?
So there's a whole lot involved, and so yeah, I mean,
just take
there's
note.
yeah. So my theory is, I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff involved. There's you have a love map. You over your lifetime, you develop a picture in your head of the kind of people that you're attracted to. So there's that. The visual stuff, there's the chemistry that's going on. But my overarching theory for the book is simpler than that. I mean, there are all those layers on top of each other, but the simple one for me is we tell stories to make sense of the chaos of our lives. Life is chaos, right? I don't
One damn thing
care what
after
anybody
another.
else says. It's just the whole thing is chaos, but we make stories up. We search for the narrative that we can put together to make sense of it. And, like, for example, childbirth. I mean, the moment your baby's born, you're already letting go of some of the moments of the birth process to hold on to the bits that tell a story that you want to tell about the birth of the child, a huge event like that. So we use stories to make sense of chaos. We also use, and the other theory that I have is the one that I started with in Rarotonga, which is when you tell a story about falling in love, you fall in love again, because as you relive that moment, you set off that chemical reaction that's going on in your brain. So if you want to stay with someone, and you might not, but let's pretend you do, if you keep talking about the moment you fell in love, you keep falling in love. That's my theory. And that's the theory that the neuroscientist and the relationship expert responded to by saying, yeah, fuck, that's probably true.
And it's clear from the book that you were so thrilled that they confirmed
Yes!
the hunch you had.
Brilliant. It was a very special moment for me.
I understand that was like 3 years from brainwave to book.
Yeah.
That's a hell of a long time to keep on one track. So I'm really interested in.
3 years. I pissed around for a lot of it.
But still, like, there's the interviewing, transcribing, editing, structuring the thing, talking with you, translating science into layperson's terms, bigger than Ben-Hur, which only took 9 months to shoot. So, how do you keep on going? And you didn't put your rest of your life on hold, presumably.
No, I had to squeeze it into my normal life of work and family and stuff. But I found it so exciting, and so it's pretty, I mean, the frustration for me was not being able to spend 8 hours in my office working on it. That was the frustrating part of it. And I treat writing as a job. You know, I go down in my pajamas, admittedly, to my office, and I start at 9 o'clock and I'll finish at 6. And I would go for days without washing, and you know that lots of writers. Well, you don't notice. Lots of writers. Yeah, you're sitting there for days, and you go, something doesn't smell right. Should the cat bring something into the office and you realise it's you in your stinky pajamas from 3 days, and you treat yourself to a shower.
Not being changed, you know.
But I would, if I could just stay in my office without anybody bothering me for days and days on end, I would be very happy. Yeah.
Thank you for persevering. Now, to give us a sense of the flavour of the stories and the style of the book, perhaps you'd like to read us a story.
Yeah, I will. So this is I had a rule that my rule was that couples had to have been together for 15 years. And the thinking behind that was that life goes in cycles of 7. And if you had survived 2 cycles of 7 and a bonus year, then you are a pretty settled relationship. You know, you get to that point in a relationship where you go, instead of going, I am walking out of here, I'm never going to see you again. And after a certain number of years, it'll be different for everybody. You go, oh, fuck it, let's work on this because I've just broken you in. And I cannot be asked starting from scratch with some new one. So it was the rule was 15 years, and I broke it a few times with, I think, really happy results. And so this is a couple who I broke the rule for. And I should probably also just quickly explain there are 2 reasons for thinking about things that have happened to you. 2 reasons for you can ruminate and you can savour a memory. You can ruminate over a negative general idea, like nobody ever invites me to parties. I always say the wrong thing. They're very generalised statements and they're negative. Savouring is a specific, detailed story that you relive because it brings you happiness and joy. So that's all I'll tell you. So this is a chapter called Don't Be Too Polite. It's got some swear words in it, which is appropriate. I ignored the shit out of my 15 years together rule to put Declan and Maeve in this book, and I couldn't be happier about that. They broke a few rules themselves when they got together in 2008, and they couldn't have been happier about that either. They kept their story a secret until we sat down with cups of tea and shortbread in November 2015. A few days earlier, Declan had been talking to our mutual friend Dan, Declan's best buddy and the celebrant at their wedding, about me coming over to get their story. He told Dan that he and Maeve were still not sure whether they should tell me the true version or the fake version. Declan tells me, Dan goes, "What do you mean, the true version?" Because he'd had to read out the fake version at our wedding. They might not have told their real story to other people, but they talk about it a lot with each other. They treasure it, relive all the moments, feel all the feels they had from the first instant they met. Because it's a story, you know, Declan says. Other relationships start because your friends know each other, or you drink in the same pub, or you just fall into it with someone, but this was different. The story makes me laugh and cry at the same time, Maeve says. Life has been exciting and so awesome, Declan says, from the day he first saw Maeve, and then he qualifies it. Other than getting cancer, apart from that little hurdle, we all try laughing at this. Other than that little fucking thing, Maeve adds brightly, it's been bloody brilliant. When we talk in 2015, Declan is managing a recruitment company and Maeve is an IT project manager. She's Irish from a little town in Donegal called Muff. Still makes me laugh. Muff, Declan exclaims, and you can tell he spent the last 7 years enjoying the fact that her hometown is a euphemism for a lady place. You're from a little town called Waipu, so I don't know what you're talking about. Maeve counters, as she no doubt has once or twice before. Maeve is one of those raven-haired Celtic beauties. She could easily pass as the fourth sister of the cause. Declan's no slug either. There's a passing resemblance, I've always thought, to Jake Gyllenhaal on one of Jake's good days. They're terrific party people. Jeremy and I have shared cabs home with Declan and Maeve from various boozy pub nights and music gigs. Their houses on the way home to ours. And there's always a drunken exchange, haggling over who will settle the fare. "Pay the driver, Declan," Maeve would insist. "No, we've got this," Jeremy would declare, while the driver rolled his eyes, just wishing someone would get it sorted. When Declan is diagnosed with cancer not long after their 2014 wedding, everyone is devastated. You try to think of helpful things to do, right? Well, I'm shit at casseroles and baking, but I thought maybe an afternoon sitting in the sun and talking about how they fell in love might be a nice distraction for them both, an opportunity for savouring, which is when they decided to tell the true story of the first time, and I got to see a grown man blush. I don't know if that's enough, isn't it? It sets it up. So, do you want more? Oh, all right, fuck it. Yeah, let's go. What's the time? Oh, yeah. So, back in 2008, Declan was 30 and living with his cousin in Perth. Maeve was 25 and working with the cousin's partner, which is how she got invited over to their place one afternoon for a barbecue, along with her boyfriend. Declan immediately noticed Maeve. She instantly clocked him. "We're still arguing over whether I chased her or she chased me. I'm not really sure. I reckon she was chasing me," he grins. And then Declan goes on to describe in minute detail exactly what Maeve was wearing that day. She'd just been for a swim at the beach, so there was a blue sundress and jandals with the outline of a wet bikini underneath, which was pretty cute. We all agree that the who was chasing whom question might have just been answered. Then Maeve recounts how later that evening, among a crowd of people, including her boyfriend, she couldn't take her eyes off Declan. He was playing the guitar and kept playing these lovely songs, and I was just... She drifts off into a happy sigh. The more wines that kept going down, the more I thought, he's so gorgeous. "Yeah, see," Declan leaps in, "she was chasing me." For the record, Maeve recalls that Declan was wearing a red checked shirt, black skinny jeans, and his chucks, the legendary Converse high tops he wore to every music gig with Dan, and clearly other auspicious occasions. So, okay. All right, I'll do this because this is a dirty bit. Not long after the cousins' barbecue, a massive crew of Irish, Aussies and Kiwis went camping beside the Margaret River. This included Declan, Maeve and the boyfriend. Maeve describes her 5.5-year relationship with a boyfriend as one of those ones that had gone on 3 years too long, but no one had the initiative to call it off. At night, beside the Margaret River, people started trickling off to bed. This included the boyfriend just over there in a tent, and Declan and Maeve ended up alone by the campfire. They held hands, which led to a bit of snogging over by the woodpile. "It was very bad," Maeve says, meaning the propriety of it, not the kissing. "Yes, it was bad," Declan says, "and it got even worse." Passing by the wood stack led to something even more passionate in the campground shower block. There are noticeably several emotions going on for both of them as they tell me this. One is a touch of embarrassment at their own behaviour, and also surprise and a fair sprinkling of joy as the irresistibleness of the attraction. This wasn't normal behaviour for either of them, but something powerful was going on that overrode the usual rules. This thing between them was something different, and it mattered more to them than behaving well. The next day was Declan's 31st birthday. It was also 35 degrees. He was tragically hungover and feeling more than a little awkward around the boyfriend. Maeve doubts the boyfriend suspected anything. They were barely talking by that stage and had paid one another almost no attention. In any event, the camping trip came to an abrupt end when the whole crew was tossed out for making too much noise, which Declan and Maeve can't be blamed for. They were very discreet. Everyone went home, and this is when the romance started. Yeah.
Now, there is a sad coda to that. There is a very sad coda. It's partly why this is such a lovely story, because it's so naughty and fizzy at the beginning.
Yeah. So I'll try and read the last little bit, because they ended up in New Zealand and they got married, and they had 2 weddings, one in New Zealand and one in Ireland. And they were telling me about the proposal and how they're not romantic and So there was a proposal. It wasn't a down on one knee proposal, but it was still pretty romantic. Declan struggles to remember the date of the engagement for a moment, so Maeve helps out. The 28th of February 2014. Later, when he's getting tired, he can't remember how old he is now.
No, can't. Do you want to just leave it?
No, you read it. So it's a reading.
Later, when he's getting tired, he can't remember how old he is now, and she helps with that too. So sometimes this little cancer hurdle makes its presence felt. But just before I leave, when Maeve goes to get their wedding album, suddenly Declan perks up and is remembering all kinds of details. The upgrade to business class on their international flight because they had Maeve's wedding dress with them as a carry-on. She'd forgotten that. The upgrade, not the dress. The hilarity of being given twin beds at the hotel on the first night of the Irish honeymoon. The earlier temptation to elope, but how glad they are that they did 2 proper family weddings, that there's nothing at all to regret. It's been so cool all the way, he grins. Declan died on the 10th of February 2016, just 3 months after we sat on the deck in the sunshine. So, thank you. I don't know if it's one or both of them said they weren't romantic. But and that seems to be a theme. Like the people in this book, although actually the stories seem romantic, are all very busy declaring that they're not romantics.
Yeah, at the end of every interview, sorry about that, I'm good now. At the end of every interview, I'd say, so are you romantic? And they go, no, we're not. No, we hate, flowers, and I'm allergic to flowers, or, I hate soft toys, and once I gave them a soft toy with a knife in it because we find that kind of thing funny or whatever. And then they would tell me some extraordinary story, like, one couple they met when they were 16 and they are now in their mid-50s, so they've been together 40 years. And they were going, no, we're not romantic. And she said, oh, hang on, I'll just show you this. And she came back with a treasure chest, a wooden box, that he had made for her the week he met her, aged 16, in his woodwork class at school. And you lift the lid and it's got their names on it and the date that he met her, with a hot poker and a heart in it. And that's the treasure in their house is the thing he made for her at woodwork class when he was 16. And they're going, we're not romantic. And you're going, you're lying to me.
There's something about New Zealanders not wanting to...
Yeah, maybe, yeah, I don't know. I think that actually, I just think romance is not buying flowers at the gas station. I think romance is first of all, making the box at woodwork, but also keeping it for 40 years. Yes, that's indeed, romance. Indeed. Yeah.
Some of the stories are just, we met, it was love at first sight kind of thing, I love her, I must be with her. But some of them have got the most extraordinary switchbacks and turns and obstacles, sometimes that keep them apart for years.
Yeah. So Patrick and, Patrick Reynolds and Maria Maisha have this amazing story. They grew up in Auckland, neighbouring suburbs, went to neighbouring high schools. She knew his brothers, went to, so they should have met when they were growing up. And it gets worse. They both did their OE to London, worked on the same street, didn't meet. She had lunch every day in a cafe he was working at, but somehow his shifts never matched up with when. The most extraordinary bit is that she was working for a publishing house in London and her boss came in one morning and said, I have met the perfect man for you. You will just adore him. He's got either an Australian or a Kiwi accent, I can't tell, but he's tall, dark and handsome, and he looks like... I can't remember. And I've set you up on a date, and she wouldn't go because she said, I'm not into having a relationship right now. So 3 years later, they did finally meet because she was going out with his flatmate. And eventually they got together, but it took so many... the fates just going, would you just meet each other? And it turned, the blind date she'd been set up with in London that she didn't turn up to was with him. So just constantly doing this until finally they got together. But he says just as well, because if we'd met in London or we'd met, I would have, this is a quote, he said, I would have fucked it up. He wasn't ready for a proper relationship at that point. But
that seems to be a real theme too, that you can put the same 2 people in a room, nothing happens.
Yeah.
They have to somehow be, there's an emotional, not just proximity, but an emotional readiness. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's the death of a parent or something that just seems
Yeah.
to soften them up and make them ready or something.
Well, I think sometimes those big life traumas catapult people. It's a catalyst that gets things moving. So there are a couple of stories in there where the death of a parent is a catalyst for suddenly going, I want to make my own family now. I'm ready to put some roots down. Well, yeah. So it will accelerate the process sometimes. And one of the things that blew my mind was with Patrick and also with a couple of other men in the book, Jim and Soraya. Jim, is that they got hit by an overwhelming desire to get married. And I'd never heard of this phenomenon before, but at least 3 men in the book, because there's also Gavin Schist, it happened to him as well, just suddenly, they, in a relationship with somebody, and then with an unbidden urge, Patrick called it a malady, to get married. And like Patrick literally said to his brother, I'm giving myself 2 weeks to get over this sickness. And if I haven't got over it by then, I will ask her to marry me. And he didn't get over it. He married, they've been together for 20 or 30 years. And I was talking about that with my husband. And he said, yeah, that's what happened to me. So, because we'd been together 12 years and we were in Las Vegas, and he went, should we get married? And I went, oh, I don't know. And then I remembered he'd never been married and he should have a turn. And everybody should do it once, at least. But he says that that's what it was like for, and I didn't even really notice that, but that's what, he just reached this moment where he just desperately, badly, passionately wanted to get married. Weird, eh? To me. Oh, well, I was there. Yeah.
And a lot of it is about luck and fates and things like that. Like you start believing that people are destined when you see, in one of the stories, I remember the girl, she was only a girl, they were both almost children. He had the milk round, and it turned out, the couple only discovered this in retrospect, that he had been delivering milk to her, and she would be waiting by the gate for the milk or the orange juice, maybe it was. Yeah. So they could have met when they were 10. Yeah. Like there's somehow that fate had been just shifting.
There are a couple of
on the board.
milkmen in the book.
Yeah, I noticed that.
I think there's a possibility that if you do a lot of deliveries to a lot of houses, you might end up married to one of those people at some point.
Yeah.
But there was those connections of, I knew you. I mean, there's that other fantastic couple who, they'd met, he'd rescued her from drowning in a river.
That's right.
And then they met again a few years later, and they both went, I kind of know who you are, but I'm not really sure, and started a relationship. And it was a few weeks into the relationship when they went, oh my God, you were the guy that saved my life.
How's that?
Cute. Yeah.
Now, we are fast running out of time. Do you want to touch on some of what you call the brainy bits?
Yeah.
Particularly for me, interesting about talking to your experts and how I remember the neuroscientist said that remembering is actually a creative act in itself, that it's a way to make meaning out of our lives.
Yeah, so the thing that blew me away, I didn't understand anything about memory before I started writing the book. I didn't understand how we remember things. And so one of the first concepts that I had to get my head around, and maybe everybody in the world knows this except me, I thought that if you asked me to remember last Christmas, it would be in a little file in my brain. There's last Christmas. But that's not how it works. We encode the different parts of the memory in different places in our brain. So if I say to you, think about last Christmas, your hippocampus is running around your brain office digging into various file boxes. And in one of them will be the smells of last Christmas, the visuals from last Christmas, your emotional response to what happened last Christmas, what your aunt said last Christmas. So all those things are in different places in your brain, and your hippocampus runs around your brain grabbing the visual, the smells, the taste, the sounds, the emotions, all of those things, and puts them together in a complete file and lays it on your brain desk and goes, there, it's Christmas. So there's a possibility that your hippocampus, as it runs around the brain office retrieving those bits from different file boxes, will pick the wrong bit out. It might pull out the smell of ham when actually you had turkey. So that's why sometimes your memories can be unreliable. So that's an episodic memory. That's when you actually relive the moment as you remember it. Your hippocampus running around and that's, when I said I watch people fall in love again when they describe falling in love, that's an episodic memory. They're re-experiencing the moment. But after you've been remembering it episodically for a while, you start to press it into a semantic memory, which is complete in and of itself. So when my great uncle told the story the same way every time with the same words, that's a semantic memory. And he's recalled that memory in a way that makes meaning of something for him. So he's not re-experiencing. The episodic memory will always be available, but you will go to the semantic memory. And so what happens, I found that so fascinating because it explained the variations in memory that people have, like Bryony and Roger, who told me the story of when they first met, and it was at Canterbury University in the Student Union building, and Roger can beautifully describe the moment he first saw Bryony, and she was standing at the top of the stairs in the Student Union building with the light behind her, and she descended the stairs in the Union building towards him like she was an angel descending from heaven. It's a very clear, very detailed memory. Bryony remembers the exact moment she met Roger. It was at Canterbury University at the Student Union building, and Roger was standing at the top of the stairs and descending them with the light behind him like an angel descending from heaven. And so one of them's wrong. And we'll never know which one. But we know that they have shared that story so many times, and one of them has told it so vividly that the other has replaced their memory with the memory of the person who told the story. Like they love each other so much that they have actually encoded the same memory, which I think is delightful. And they're a really good couple example because they also have, they both have a memory that they have held onto that the other person hasn't because it was too traumatic for them. He can't remember the time he broke up with her, and she can in great detail where it was and what he said. And she can't remember the extra boyfriend she had before they got together because she's blotted that out. So, yeah.
So together they make a fuller memory.
Yeah.
And that's part of the
that's one of the useful
enriching
things
your life.
about what the neuroscientist is working on. She wasn't really working on how to fall in love. She was they're using that kind of understanding of how the brain works with people with dementia and doing couple therapy, because you hold different parts of the story, and if you become a widow, the person who has some parts of that story is no longer there to provide them, you can lose your bits of the story as well. So they're quite often now working with dementia patients with both members of the couple, because they hold different parts of the memory and can cue each other and fill each other's gaps in. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Well, we've got we don't have any more time for the quiz part of it, but well, from me, anyone. Are there any questions from the audience? We've got a microphone.
Good afternoon, Michelle Maralina. One quick question and then a comment. In your book with the milkman, was he called Ernie?
He drove the fastest milk cart in the
West.
West.
Yes, I was brought up with that. The Declan story moved me and reminded me of the recent documentary on Celia Lashley, with all the work that she'd done. And the one thing they said at the end of the documentary was what she was aiming to do was write to all her grandchildren. And she passed before she did that. I thought, what a wonderful idea it is. I'm on that path now with my 8 grandsons, to tell them about, not so much me, because I hope to be around for a lot longer, but about their mother and father, that they might not know from when my children were born and what my children were like as children.
That's great.
So on that theme, maybe that's a book that everybody would like to write, rather than their life history. Or I'll throw you the idea, but maybe in 3 years, I hope it take it.
It's really interesting. Declan and Maeve is one of those examples of, so that's not their real names, because Maeve she was still shy about that story, slightly embarrassed about that story, and so they're not their real names. But Declan's mother, who had never heard that story before, was told that that was their story, and she is effing delighted. And she said, so we've corresponded, and she sent me some messages saying that she can hear his voice in that chapter, and that she hadn't known that story, but she thinks it's delightful. And when Maeve found out that her mother-in-law now knew that she'd shagged a son for the first time in the shower block by the Murray River, she was like, oh my God, I'm still going to have to see her at a family event. And then was reassured that actually she thinks it's gorgeous, and she's thrilled that their story is in the book and that their love story gets to live on. So yeah, those stories are really, and and some of the people in the book it still correspond. And one of the stories in there is about a couple who, I'm just telling the dirty stories today, a couple who had sex on a yacht. They broke into a yacht and shagged, spent the night together. And they also told me during the interview that I did with them that they had sex in an art gallery once. And they both looked shocked that they didn't do that kind of stuff anymore. They were like, oh, we used to be quite out there. We were kind of risk-takey. Now we've got grown-up children and we're pillars of the community, and we don't do any of that wild stuff. And I said, why don't you, on your anniversary of shagging on the yacht, why don't you break into a yacht in Wellington Marina and shag? And they went, oh, we couldn't possibly do that. What if we got caught? And he very sensibly said, they've got security cameras now. And I said, well, look, why don't you hire a yacht and pretend to break into it? I don't know how much I can help you people if you don't help yourself. And so that was terrific. And she came there in the book with fake names too, because they're slightly embarrassed about their story. She came to the book launch, and she said to me, took me aside afterwards and said, since we did that interview with you, we've started having sex in public again. Which is really cute, because I finished the book by saying, we go back to the tone of our early relationship at the end. And so if you are ever out and you see a couple of octogenarians shagging in an art gallery, it'll be these two people. Well, turns out, that is exactly what they're doing. So it's good.
Any other questions? We're really out of time, though.
Oh, sorry. A bit too.
Okay. Oh, yes, Liz.
You rock. Thank you very much. I'm just wondering if you're romantic and how that manifests itself.
In my relationship? We do a lot of storytelling. We tell stories, and we also quite consciously go and seek adventures. Our two favourite places to visit are New Orleans, and we try to go there every year. We don't always manage it, but because we love jazz and food and drinking. And the other place that we really love, and we go there as often as we possibly can, is Disneyland. So we go and ride roller coasters. I wear Minnie Mouse ears. I have a wardrobe of them. I've got formal, I've got day wear, I've got Halloween, I've got Christmas. So we have that kind of relationship. Yeah, he's pretty cool.
So, time to thank you very much
thank
for
you,
sharing
Ro.
your
Thank
stories, and also for making other people's stories available in a way that's so uplifting, heartwarming. I don't usually like these things. I'm a bit of a cynic myself, but
Yeah.
it's good to have your heart warmed every now and
It
then.
is, eh? Yeah, the world could do with some kindness, I reckon.
And I just want to add a story. When I was preparing for this interview, I was reading the book out at Grape Escape, and a woman came by and started talking to my dog, so we got into a bit of a conversation. I suddenly thought I could ask her, where did she meet her husband? And and I said, oh, look, I'll tell you why. And I held up the book, which has got a picture of Michelle on the front.
Oh, can I just say,
I'm going-
the designer
Oh,
of
designer,
the cover is Holly Dunn, and she is down the back of the room, and she lives
Hi,
here in
Holly.
Nelson. She designed that.
Anyway, I held up the book to this woman, and I said, look, I'm talking to Michelle next week, and this book is all about how we met, so that's why I thought to ask you. And she didn't answer the question. She said, oh, we know her Uncle Trevor. He lives in Motueka. And, ta-da! Oh, and she said, we love him. He's so funny. The whole family's really funny. Tell Michelle to tell Uncle Trevor that we love him. And he's here.
He's there. Yay! He is very funny. He is very funny.
And just one more thing, a terribly serendipitous find in an op shop on the weekend. And it's a book, and it's called Mad Love. And somebody has done this.
Oh,
So it's a present for you.
Oh my God, Rose. That's beautiful.
There you go. It seems so perfect. So thank you very much for being a great audience, and thank you, Michelle.
And a huge thank you to Roe Cambridge and Michele A'Court. Please come and meet Michelle afterwards, after you get your copy of the book at the bookstore. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.